Dubois School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. Oh, sorry. Okay, Gracelin is there. Great, excellent. Then we'll start with Gracelin. So Gracelin Baskaran is a director of the project on critical mineral security at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. She's a mining economist, and her primary expertise is in critical minerals, trade, and emerging markets. She started working in South Africa with the World Bank for 5 years. Previously held positions at the University of Cambridge, University of London, and University of Cape Town. She's now writing a book on international strategy for critical minerals for the United States, has published over 150 op-eds and columns, and recently testified before Congress, and holds a doctorate from the University of Cambridge. Gracelin, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I apologize for running late. I'm also still working on getting over sick. I had to talk for 9 hours yesterday, which means my voice did no nurturing and healing whatsoever. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is a little bit of a snapshot. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to give you a very high level state of play of minerals. Most of you, I assume, may know a lot of that content. I'm going to run through it very quickly. Going to discuss, particularly from where I sit, what are we doing in Washington, D.C. for that? Some of you may know the U.S. is really bad at critical minerals. We opened our Bureau of Mines in 1910, which was intended to coordinate our mining activities, and we closed it in 1996. Since then, we haven't really had a whole of government approach. We never reopened it. We don't have any sort of mining agency in the United States. We have over a dozen different government institutions working on it. We have advanced quite a bit of progress in the last 4 years. And then I'm going to flip and quickly move over to like how the US is pursuing this abroad, given, you know, kind of the global South in general. And for some context, I'm the director of the project. Well, I guess now it's the Critical Mineral Security Program. And what we do is we work with US policymakers in terms of providing the support they need. I work a lot with governments in the Middle East, South America, Africa, Asia, on what partnering looks like, what economic statecraft instruments can we deploy, particularly in current market conditions. And we work a lot with private sector mining companies, end users, processors as well. Okay, so people often ask what is critical. There's dispute in the world about the idea of criticality versus strategic minerals, right? I'm not here to really settle the dispute, but I am here to tell you kind of how we view criticality and how I think about it on a daily basis. There's two factors, and this is kind of the hot, interesting dynamic of copper. Copper is not on both of our lists. So you have supply chain risk on your x-axis, which is how much do you need of it. Basically, the more you need of it, the more likely it is to be critical. The y-axis is the supply risk. So that's not just being owned by China. That could also be maybe all of your production is concentrated in a country that we aren't allies in. And then y is how important it is to energy in the context of kind of decarbonization, right? And so as we see, is critical is a dynamic term. So what we see in 2020 to 2025, we see quite a sharp increase 2025 to 2035. And this is done every year by the Department of Energy and their critical minerals assessment. And it's important to note that sometimes things move out of the red zone. Maybe we found a giant reserve of it in a friendly country, or a reserve in a friendly country moved to production. So that's really interesting. And 2025 to 2035, seeing hydrogen in that corner is like not internal combustion engines coming back, but it's like the forecasted rise of hydrogen fuel cell technology, for example. There's a typo in this, I apologize. It's on the left. So if we want to look at mineral production and processing, we freak out about China a lot. But I'm going to send you the graph on the right first, which is actually the top 3 producing. China is the kind of medium blue bar, right? And what we see is that China is a top three producer for only two of the six minerals that we talk about for the energy transition the most, which is rare earths and graphite. But if you move to the graph on the left, which is actually the top three processing, they're a top three processor for all of them, which is why we are concerned, is that we've seen in the last year and a bit, China has imposed export restrictions on graphite, germanium, gallium, antimony, rare separation. And the problem is almost all of the production for a lot of these commodities goes to China if they don't produce it. So because of that bottleneck, China can then impose restrictions on things that didn't originally come out of the ground in China, or may not have been mined by a Chinese company, but can't be processed anywhere else. And then we have supply chain vulnerability. Quickly, graph on the left, if you want to know why why EVs are important, where the demand is. The graph on the bottom shows that or on the left, if you look at the bar on the bottom, the average conventional vehicle needs about 30-ish kilograms of critical minerals, right? It's primarily copper with a little bit of manganese. Your electric vehicle needs 210 kilograms. That's a lot. 62-ish of those are graphite. You can't see me. This only works when you can see me. It's about 1.2 times my body weight, because my Americans don't know kilograms. So we have to like translate that into like digestible metrics, right? That's a lot of graphite. And when you think about China, the fact that if you go back here and you look at that graph, graphite is the second bar from the bottom on the left. China processes about 90% of graphite. China imposed graphite export restrictions. We need a lot of graphite, right? Now, the biggest dilemma that we have, people are not buying EVs as forecasted. A lot of the IEA's forecasts from 2021, 22 are not panning out the way that they were supposed to pan out. And a big reason that I would argue is that interest rates are really high. Until the federal funds rate crossed 5% last year, the average EV generally sold at the same rate or faster in the US than your internal traditional gasoline vehicle. Now, that was about 35-ish to 40 days. Now, your average gasoline vehicle in the United States sells in 40 days, and the EV is about 72 days. So I'm from Detroit. I love our auto industry. We are struggling. And it's like a $55,000 vehicle with a really high interest rate. It's just not like entirely digestible right now for a lot of consumers. And then we see on the right, clean energy as a whole is very energy intensive. You'll see that dark blue bar. We need a lot of copper. Even the graph on the left, it's a medium blue. Copper, the second biggest in absolute quantity. You move to the right, it's a very significant commodity we need across the board. EVs are driving the demand in energy, friends. And this is why there's base metals prices are really low, is it's not offshore wind that's going to carry base metals prices. It is EV demand that's going to carry that. Copper, dark blue at the bottom, graphite, nickel. And again, perspective coming from the US, we have less than 1% of the world's graphite. We have less than 1% of the world's nickel, 1% of the world's cobalt. So this is going to turn to the point of the fact that we can't meet all of our own needs. Quickly, in like 2 minutes, want to go through what the US is doing. And I'll turn this into English for you. Back in 2010, we realized minerals could be weaponized, right? China imposed export restrictions on rare earths because they got into a dispute with Japan on a fishing trawler dispute. There's a lot of white blank space in the middle. We didn't do anything in those years, right? And then what happens is starting really with Trump, he issued an executive order kind of midway through his administration saying, look, we're really vulnerable to supply chains. Biden came in, he virtually issued the same executive order. Critical minerals are extremely bipartisan, one of the most bipartisan issues in Washington, D.C. And then we started rolling out legislation. Some of you may be familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act. It offers you a $7,500 tax credit for your EV, and half of that tax credit is reliant, or it's if the minerals are mined and processed in the US or a country that we have a free trade agreement with, which there's a lot of controversy because it's a very arbitrary threshold to getting your tax credit. And then you have things like Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. Some of you may know that's doing the Libido Corridor. We have a Mineral Security Partnership, which is our alliance with pretty much all high income countries plus India. We now have a new forum, tier 2 status we've introduced. Say that if anyone's interested. Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act set aside quite a bit of money for workforce development, recycling, et cetera. And then importantly, DPA Title III, which is up top, is actually funding a lot of those processing facilities to reduce that reliance on China. We've now dispersed $300 million to Australian company, primarily to build rare earths processing facilities in Texas. Graphite, we're building a lot of processing capacity. So then it turns to like, where do we get our minerals? We don't have a lot. Like, there's a Republican senator who I very much like, in fact, but he said, I don't understand why we don't mine what we have in the US first. And it's probably mostly not Americans on this call. The answer is, well, we didn't have what we need. You don't get to pick where God put your minerals. And so we turn abroad, and can't do it without China, can't do it without China and the emerging world. The difficulty for the US, Latin America excluded to this, but particularly if we look at certain parts of Asia outside of China, if we look at Africa, these are not countries we've commercially engaged with. They have historically been aid countries, USAID donors, recipients. So we are looking at how to engage with these countries differently. Chile has long been a recipient of mining money. Argentina it doesn't have a ton of operating copper assets, for example, but is a top recipient of exploration. This is a dilemma that we have. These are the countries that the US has free trade agreements with. There is a massive misalignment with where mineral resources are beyond, say, Australia, Canada, Chile, Peru. By and large, FTAs were not done with minerals in mind, right? And we're not signing new free trade agreements. It's not a trade environment. So a couple of challenges that we have. One, exploration expenditures have generally dipped, and some of the countries with the most potential are the ones struggling the most. We see here that Africa got the second lowest level of mineral exploration. But it has, it's kind of counterintuitive. Last year, they had 4% of the world's lithium. By 2027, it's going to be expected that they have 12%. Kind of counterintuitive for an exhaustive resource, but the reality is that it is we're looking and we're finding, it's kind of the whole idea. And that goes to the graph on the right. If you look at Africa, which is that the more as time goes, our resources grow, because we are starting to look, we are not exploring at scale. With this, I spent a lot of time with African ministers and mines. Just got back from the DRC last month. And one of the challenges, again, is that exploration. Zambia is a country that has actually done pretty well on the mining front in the last few years, but 55% of Zambia has never been mapped, and 45% is relying on mapping from 1998. DRC, if you ever look at a country of where their mines are, you have a strip on the eastern border, you have down kind of southern Kolwezi. The rest of the country, which is massive, by the way, is entirely unmapped. And so it is a larger dilemma of the fact that these countries don't have the geological expertise, would be number one. Resource nationalism is a rise. It's created a little bit of aversion in some of these regions with the rise of export restrictions. This map was we made it a couple of years ago. There's been a pretty notable increase since then. I'm not going to bore you with this, but to say that prices are really bad for commodities because of those base metal trends. This is your lithium, and we wonder why nobody wants to invest in lithium right now. This is your EV sales. I'm just going to give you a couple quick graphics in the interest of time. That the Wall Street Journal made this graph, really appreciate it. It is why people are not, base metal prices are low, is you saw that sharp turn when interest rates kind of flipped up past 5%. Not saying that's the only reason, but definitely going to be a sharp contributing reason. Nickel prices, really crap right now. BHP has been forced to close a mine in Australia. It's unprofitable. There's been a mine in New Caledonia, Glencore closed. And so what we've seen is more and more market concentration has ended up in the Chinese. Over half of the world's nickel is now being produced by the Chinese in Indonesia. Not environmentally friendly either, may I add. But ultimately, Western companies have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders, and I cannot expect them to operate unprofitably. China operates on a little bit of a different operating model, the fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders. This is Indonesia's dominance in nickel production. As you can see, since 2020, they were producing about 700,000. They're already up to over 2 million. And in light of other mines closing, their actual market share is also increasing quite significantly. Cobalt prices. America opened and closed its only cobalt mine last year because cobalt prices started at 45 a pound at the beginning of the year, 25 a pound, 15 pound a pound. You can't pull cobalt out for $15 a pound. They went on care and maintenance. So we complain about the DRC, but the reality is like our only cobalt mine kind of went up and down in a year, within a year on the back of low prices. Copper prices are really good because copper is not an energy metal. Copper is an AI data center infrastructure. It's pretty much every part of our modern economy. So it's a little bit immune to this because its uses go far beyond the drivers of what most base metal prices are going by. And then I'm going to wrap up by just one last thing is really what we're seeing is a current world order of new countries coming to play. Everybody wants to play ball with the Middle East now. Unexpected, but what's happened is their economic diversification narrative is extremely ambitious. Saudi Arabia is putting $15 billion at this problem. That is eye-watering capital to the private sector and even to most Western economies, right? So we, for example, in the US, we have a congressional delegation there that just is leaving today from the China Select Committee to say, how do we partner, right? A friend of mine runs the Saudi Arabian mining company. He's American, and he always says we've had a Catholic marriage over oil. We must extend that to minerals. We see that Aramco, biggest like oil company, they were producing 13% of oil. They now want to produce 13% of energy. They're now looking at lithium. So it's really interesting as there's new players. Japan has become exploded. So we're actually looking at a world order in minerals that's very multipolar. Okay, that's all.
Excellent, Gracelin, super interesting. Just so like to begin with, I mean, if prices go down, sort of, does that mean sort of like these minerals are not as much of a bottleneck as sort of some people sort of fear them to be? I mean, sort of you've been to the DRC, like cobalt is literally like one of the most concentrated minerals. Even there, like you to sort of like paraphrase this Republican senator, there was a mine opening in the US, but then like went down again. I mean, do you see this could like change very quickly? For example, if geopolitical tensions rise again, and maybe how much, let's say, can Arabic countries supply in this space? I mean, Saudi Arabia really like a lot of desert, not that much, let's say, trouble with social license to operate, I assume. Yeah, and on copper, just sort of where do you see it? Because like I think in Chile, for example, like ore grades are declining. So where is all this copper going to come from? Because I think it's really just like the sheer amount that we're going to need is more than it's ever been historically mined. So yeah.
Yeah, those are so a couple of really good questions there. So low demand does not mean minerals are a bottleneck, right? Low demand means that private investment is now a bottleneck because private investment is like almost at a 4-year low. S&P puts out a pipeline activity index score that brings together drilling, exploration, financing, the whole deal. And the private sector is just kind of skittish because prices are low. The problem is that this actually China is continuing to invest. So it in a way actually starts to create a wider divergence of new mines in terms of ownership of these mines. So what we're doing is we're in a short period blip. I don't think this is long term. I think EV demand will eventually uptick when economies kind of recalibrate. But we are seeing a private sector bottleneck. That's number one. 2, copper and cobalt. That's a really interesting example. The reason everybody wants to go to the DRC, or like, and everybody's looking at the DRC, is not really their cobalt. Those are not primary cobalt mines. The mine in the US is one of the only primary cobalt mines. The mines in the DRC are pretty much copper mines with cobalt byproduct. And so it's really attractive with these assets is the copper. And then you get the cobalt out in the process. Nobody is really peeling to sell that cobalt right now. Everybody wants to get that copper out of the ground because of how good copper prices are. And so again, that goes back to the kind of linking up with what you said about a place like Chile, like, you know, the Chile story, Escondida, and low ore grades. It links up to the fact that copper demand is going to be unrivaled. I know in the US, we're going to do our first proper transmission upgrading since the 1970s, right? Is that a lot of these areas are actually being looked at for copper potential. Last year, 47% of all exploration for all commodities globally went into copper, which really tells you where private investors are willing to put their money. If you look at Argentina, it's part of the lithium triangle. 87%, even though it's one of the biggest lithium holders, was in copper, right? Like copper is where people are putting their money. And that goes back to the Saudi Arabia, sorry, just linking up points here, is that they actually only have a couple of commodities domestically. They are a desert, but they have gold, they have phosphate, which is for your fertilizer for your food. They have some copper. They have a rare earth deposit they're going to be coming out with soon. But reality is they're also very externally focused. They took a 10% equity stake in the Brazilian mining company Vale Base Metals, right? And they actually are looking at the copper belt for copper. They're not that interested in cobalt. And so again, it goes back to the narrative of where are the commodities that people see potential. It's not your base metals for EVs right now. And ultimately what we want from the Middle East is offtake for all of our Western countries, right? So the question is going forward is, can we create some sort of preferential trade agreement, you know, tariff release, et cetera, to incentivize offtake tax credit system? And so again, I think copper is really where we're seeing people are making kind of the rounds with, and then other commodities, particularly byproducts, are important. But nobody wants to sink a new cobalt mine because battery chemistry is changing, and so nobody's like, oh, I want to go sink a 50-year primary cobalt mine now. That cobalt mine in the U.S. was actually a brownfield asset that was reopened.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. I mean, I could, yeah, I have more questions, but Osmel, I'm gonna hand over to you, especially because Gracelin was mentioning, several, let's say, of your areas of work in Latin America. So, Osmel is adjunct professor at Georgetown and George Washington University, as well as regional economic advisor for the Andean country department at the Inter-American Development Bank. He has a specialty on macroeconomics, public finance, energy economics, and oil economics. And has been working on development challenges in Latin America related to resource abundance, energy growth, and productivity, among others. Has been a visiting fellow at the Harvard School of Kennedy of Government, and also worked on the chief economist for Petroleros in Venezuela, and holds a PhD in economics from MIT. Osmel, very much looking forward to your insights.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Good morning. Thank you, Niels, for the invitation. Happy to in a way, be back in Europe, where we spent the summer working at the University of Kassel. Let me start. So when Niels invited me, posed me this question about, constraints to growth, no? And I think that the key question is whether, there will be constraints to the energy transition, no, coming from the extractive sector, no? So the game plan for my presentation today, I'm going to start discussing a little bit, then where we are on minerals, and then a couple of cautionary tales, no, to keep in mind, no? So what we learn from oil, so this is oil production in the world, no? Since the 1950s, no? And I put the 2019 because, as you know, the pandemic was a bad year, so 2020 is not a good year. But it's in each decade, no? And you see there, oil production has been increasing without problem since the 1950s, no? So the question is, where are we with reserve? Are we running out of oil? Do we have any problems? So this line here is how much years of oil we have left based on the reserve that we have, no? And you see there that it has been growing, no? So we produce and produce more oil, and then we have more and more oil left to develop, no? So basically we have oil all the way to 2070, no? So no progress there if we think about decarbonization, that we're going to run out of oil, no? So it reminds me a little bit of this famous saying that, you know, is attributed to so many people, I don't care who say it, but there was this famous saying, no, that the Stone Age did not end because the world ran out of stones, and the oil age will not end because we ran out of oil, no? Many people say that it was Sheikh Yamani, other people say it was Hubert, I don't know who said it, but the issue is that this phrase was right on target in the point that when they say it, no? And why this happened in oil? Well, it was a mixture of three things, no? First, nature, no? The picture that you have in the bottom corner is Cantarell. Cantarell was many of the big oil fields that we discovered over the last year, or the last 50 years, but don't mention Cantarell. We have in Kazakhstan, we have Siberia. So we have discovered big oil fields, so nature has been kind in a way, no? But also, we also have technology, right? In the 70s, we have the offshore revolution, and that opens us the North Sea, for example, right? It opens the deep Gulf of Mexico. Then we have for lack of a better name, let's call it the synthetic oil revolution, that allowed, for example, the development of the Orinoco heavy oil belt in Venezuela and the Canadian tar sands, not tar sands, the tar sands in Canada. So then we span there the frontier, and then lately we have the picture that you have there in the top right corner, shale, the shale revolution, right? That with that we can do a different, or the fracking that allow us to develop oil fields that before we thought were not profitable, no? So technology. But we sometimes forget a very important issue here, that is institutions, right? The picture that you have there is one of the women conciliatory committees in Angola. Angola was off limits, right, for a long time because of war, but once you have peace, then all of a sudden you have a new place where you can develop oil. And the same happened with other African countries, but also countries made important changes that made it feasible to produce oil or develop oil before in places where institutions were not right. And I think that two good examples are, for example, Colombia and Brazil. When they both create their independent hydrocarbon agency, separate the role, put both Ecopetrol and Petrobras in the stock exchange, right? They're open, and then they begin to receive more investment, and then they develop fields that before were not available, no? So I think that the result is, I think it's a good mix of technology, but also institutions. Without the changes in the institutional framework in Brazil, we could not have been result, no? So it's a combination of nature, technology, and institutions. So that brings us where we are today in the critical minerals. In a little bit, this is a slide prepared by Meishmer, but it almost looked like the 1950s, right? In oil, right? When you think about the 1950s, 60s in oil, everybody was concerned, oh, we will run out of oil, no? And this is not like let's say layman people. There were reports from the energy department talking about the danger of running out of oil, no? So that was. But you saw what happened in the oil sector. So can we then just lay back, relax, and let the things happen in the mineral sector? Well, yes and no. I mean, because one thing is that we are in a complete different world today, no? today we are in a more democratic world, which is very different to the world that we had in the 50s and the 60s, no? So let's say that some of the institutional changes that we have were unorthodox, no? And this is not like talking conspiracy theory. I think that everybody who is in the energy field has read Commanding Heights and the Price. So we know how some institutional issues were solved in the 1950s and 60s, no? This is not the same context today. We have a more democratic societies, no? And that makes a challenge in how we are going to operate in the sector. And the issue is that today mining is related to conflicts, no? On the left, you have so in Latin America, we have so many conflicts that we already have an observatory of mining conflicts. So on the left, you already have all the conflicts that are related to mining in Latin America. So we have a huge number of conflicts of mining related to mining in Latin America, precisely in one of the countries that we see potential. So we have in Argentina, in Chile, in Peru, no? And then the same happens in Africa, no? This is a recent paper by Berman and colleagues. They map all the conflicts in Africa, and then they map all the mining areas, and surprise, surprise, there is a lot of coincidence between conflict and mining in Africa, no? And actually, they explore causality, and they find a link between extractive and mining. So therefore, mining is generating a lot of conflicts in the world, no? And this sometimes translates all the way up to courts. So these are the complaints filed at the CSIS, this World Bank panel for resolving disputes, right? And you see in the extractive is going up, the number of cases there. And I don't have here the Paris court, because remember that there are two jurisdictions where you can litigate these cases, no? So this is not only mining, and the issue that conflicts are escalating all the way to issues about property like that, and that's kind of the challenge that we have going forward, no? And the issue is that from nature to market, you need institutions, no? So this graph is from the USGS and shows the countries with the largest resource base of lithium, no? So you see there, Bolivia has the largest resource base of lithium, Argentina, Chile. But one thing is the resource base, and another thing are reserves. Reserves are those that you can really economically produce. And you see, it's a complete different picture. And especially look at these countries, Bolivia, for example, Congo, Germany, you have the issue of institutions. You need institutions. For this lithium in Bolivia to be a reality for the market, you need institutions, no? And I really want to point out Germany, because this is not an issue only on developing countries, no? So Germany has resource base of lithium, but they don't have, they are not there in the lithium reserve, no? And I have to relate that you don't have the institutions to make those nature endowments reserve. And that's the challenge that we have there today in the world, no? So that's why we have been doing this research on social license to operate. This is only for the Andean region right now. But in general, we found that the citizens actually do support the extractive sector. When you ask the citizens, do you think that mining is good or bad for your country? More than half of the population will tell you mining is good. There is support. People in these countries do think that mining is good, no? And for me, a very positive question is that if you ask, do you think the government is doing a good job? Yes, governments are doing a great job. So where is your problem? They have two problems. It's what they call in this literature distributive justice. They don't feel they're getting a fair share. And the second one is what is called in this literature procedural justice, and it's that they don't feel that companies listen to them, no? So that's the main claim, the main problem that people see, no? And interesting enough, we partner with some psychologists, because I am an economist, unfortunately, you know, and we went with there, and then they asked people to write a narrative. So they say, do you support mining or not, right? And then they give you a space, why, you know? And then we analyze with in artificial intelligence whether, and there is a whole paper. I'm not going to get into the details of that paper of what are the drivers, the psychological drivers of support or not. And that's another paper. I invite you to read the paper. But we, the economists, what we do is that we took that text and asked artificial intelligence, is that text negative or positive, no? And the interesting result is that, the interesting result is that these blue lines here is what the or artificial intelligence told us on whether or not people feel what they wrote. But sorry, the blue, I'm sorry, the blue is what they say when we ask it, do you support yes or no? This is the blue. But then the pink or I don't know, magenta here are what artificial intelligence says the text says. So it's almost, as you see, and it's always more negative than when they say in the top. So it's almost like people see these sectors as the necessary evil, no? So yes, we support it, but no, and where are the buts? So we have been doing experimental evaluations with different about firms and governments, no? And I think that there are two things. Well, people feel usually that the country, and this is very important, does not get fair share. People are not concerned about distribution inside the country. Actually, people support that the regions in the country that produce get more of the pie. It's very interesting because we have sometimes thinking this view about distribution. No, they don't care about. They want the country to get a higher share. No. Second, they want the government to take care of environment, and they want firms to take care of the environment. So environment is really high in people's perception, and that's an important challenge because we have not been able to probably calm their concerns. And third, which is very important in terms of firms, they want firms to listen to them. No, they don't feel that they get good quality interactions with mineral firms. So here, as you see, there is job for governments and job also for firms if we want to get this social license in the region. No. So therefore, I mean, what does this mean of going forward? Yes, we need to work in ensuring that, but I also would like to remember also two things, two cautionary tales, no? So this line here says if you take oil production and divide it by the real GDP, no, it's kind of the share of GDP, or basically how many barrels of oil you need to generate 1 unit of GDP, right? And you have this, I think, very well documented that how all the way up to the 70s, we actually were using more oil for each dollar of GDP. And then after the 70s, we have this less use of oil for GDP. Now, what happens if you multiply the oil by the price of oil and use nominal GDP? And this is the line, no? So the point is that, remember I told you that technology institution has made oil abundant? Yes, but it has a price, especially because before, let's say we use unconventional institutional arrangement, right, to solve access to minerals, no? In the 50s, those that are not available today in a democratic term. But so therefore, my point here is that if you take institutional shortcuts, it's not going to be cheap. Actually, as you see there today, as a part of the economy, we're spending more on energy than we were spending in the 50s, even though we are using less oil than we were using in the 50s, you know? So we have to be very careful, and just for the record, this is how it looks in copper, so it's down, no, still. But this is important, no? And the second cautionary tale, because Niels asked me if we should go to the moon or to the deep sea, no, is the nuclear history, right? So this is the share of nuclear energy in electricity generation in the world. So you see there that we have this boom. We wanted to use nuclear after the oil shock and things like that, but then it has been declining. Why? Because as a society, we fear nuclear, right? So even though nuclear accidents has been relatively scarce, we have Fukushima and Chernobyl, they have been so bad that people are scared, no? So that's, and I think that when we begin to think, oh yes, let's mine the deep sea or let's mine the moon, it will only take one bad accident for people to, so we have to be very careful a little bit, no, of trying also to look for other shortcuts, no, to avoid the debate on what happened here with natural resources, no. So in summary, will critical minerals become a bottleneck if coal if oil gave us any lessons, it's not, right? Technology, nature, and institutions saved the day in the case of oil. However, the war is different, no? A democratic war implies the actors must be heard, and that's kind of the biggest difference between the 60s and 70s and today. Mining is really related to conflicts, and then we have to listen to people that just want a fair share and companies that care about the environment. So people want a fair share and the environment. Those are the two main issues that people want. And as again, I would like to say, this is not only developing country. We have the case of Germany, but even here in the US, we have the case of Tucker Pass, no, this lithium mine in Nevada, no. So people want to be heard. The people there want to be heard, no. And also history tells us that shaky institutions or institutional shortcuts may help us solve the problem, but it's going to mean that it's going to be more expensive, no? So we're going to pay more for what we need. And that if we want to move the frontier, we have to take it that we may have societal resistance to move that frontier, no, to the moon or to the deep sea or things like that, no? So, well, that's the summary, and thank you, Niels, for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Osmel. That was really fascinating. I wasn't around in the 50s, so I literally didn't know that they were scared about running out of oil back then. It's really, I mean, I obviously asked you the limits to growth question because, yeah, you were at MIT, sort of like that's where the question originated, and it really seems that sort of like supply is so elastic. It seems, it appears that sort of like other things are sort of avoiding or like impinging sort of on all sort of this potential coming on stream. I mean, back to like what Gracelin said, she said like the DRC is not even properly mapped. I mean, you showed the map of the conflicts, but also like I guess so like geologically speaking, Latin America is, let's say, much better explored. Like, do you see like what percentage of all this sort of increase in demand do you see coming from Latin America? I mean, Saudi Arabia surely is gonna so like diversify out of oil like into these sectors. I don't know where they stand like on the democracy scale. Like, you know, if it creates conflict, like the question is if they can manage them properly. And yeah, I mean, I was mentioning the moon because yeah, Philippe Aghion said that that's like the easy way out. It seems to me now, like, I mean, essentially, like there is enough potential, let's say, in Latin America, in Africa, potentially in other world regions. I mean, you mentioned Germany. I actually see the German chancellor flying to other places saying they should mine. And I think that was partly the reason why I was mentioning the moon, more of like, I mean, the social license to operate, we all know it's really, really tough. So, I mean, maybe if there's something which, how should I say? I mean, I think we've seen so much progress like in space travel in the last 15 years that we didn't anticipate. If we see something similar in the next 15 years, maybe somewhere up leading up until 2050, you know, we might sort of really consider something which isn't economically feasible now. But I'm just going to stop there. Yeah, I mean, sort of what does this mean for Latin America? Because again, I think these social problems, like I think Europe, it's been so long ago. Like if you want to open a mine in Germany, good luck. I mean, I would say it's a bit of a political non-starter. I mean, you can prove me wrong, but I think when you were in Germany recently, you were about to learn how to close a mine, not to open one. So yeah.
No, I think, look, I mean, Latin America has the potential. I mean, look, you just look at Peru, like almost every month we have a discovery, you know. The issue is how do we engage communities, no? And I'm going to tell you the things that we are working right now, because people say they don't get a fair share, no? And then I mean the international financial institutions, the EITI and things like that. We have been working in developing these tools like, for example, Mapa Regalia or Mapa Inversión, which are maps where citizens can log in and see that the school that is in the corner of the street was financed by mining, no? In a way to show the people that are getting a fair share, no? But we have, what we have learned with an experiment that we ran this year is that that's the wrong tool. People are not engaging with those tools, no? So therefore, I think that the big challenge is how you engage communities, because you may not be using the right tools to engage communities, no? And I think that's key, because you may have you may have the, let's say, legal license, no? But we have a lot of mines that could not operate because conflict, because roads are closed and everything. So therefore, I think that the key issue here is how we engage communities, no? Because if not, I mean, you will not be a reliable part of the supply chain, you know?
Perfect. Just in the interest of time, like Davide, I saw your questions. I think they're spot on. Please, if other people have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But just in order to sort of also, I'll head over to Simona Iammarino, and then we can go eventually to the Q&A. So Simona Iammarino is a professor of applied economics at the Department of Economics and Business at the University of Cagliari in Italy. Continues to be visiting professor at the Department of Geography and Environment at the London School of Economics, where she was heading the Department of Economic Geography for quite some time, and was also part of the Economic Council of LSE. Main research interests lie in local economic development, economic geography of innovation and technological change, regional systems of innovation, and regional and economic development. So very much like what all of this is about. She is a co-editor of the Journal of Economic Geography, a member of the RSA board, and has consulted for several international institutions such as the European Commission, the OECD, and United Nations. So Simona is going to focus more on sort of like the innovation angle. Also, as Gracelin mentioned, like people wouldn't invest that much in cobalt mines anymore because they're worried about this being substituted out of minerals, of batteries. Sorry. So yeah, Simona, over to you. Very much looking forward to your insights. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me properly?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I share a flu with Gracelin today, so okay, thank you very much. So far it's been super interesting, and I am going now to maybe add another perspective, although I think that everything gets together very nicely. So how we have been studying critical raw materials technologically speaking, okay? Our concern is being technological innovation. And some years ago, already quite a few years ago, I had this intuition working as a economic geographer of innovation, of looking at critical raw materials on the basis of an article appeared on The Guardian in 2014. And then it took a long while because I was head of department. I wasn't having any resources, but then with some PhD student, we looked precisely at new technologies that are implicated in critical raw materials, and obviously the associated actors and geography. The broad research question that we address in our work, some is published, but much more is in progress, is to what extent different technologies at the 5th or 6th digit level, so really very narrow down, rely on different critical raw material over time, how the supply of CRM influence competitiveness, technological advantages of both countries and firms, where are located and what kind of technological strategies CRM user firms imply, and which places, and by places, Niels know me, I'm always interested in places specific, I mean subnational, which are the winners and the loser of this, let's say, I mean, critical raw materials based technological paradigm. We use patents, patent data using conventional natural language processing techniques and algorithm with reading through the whole patent text and abstract. We have had a lot of validation on this, and we use, long-term period, 40 years. Now we are restricting to latest windows. And we combine also this data with other data sources like British Geological Survey, United States Geological Survey, European Geological Data Infrastructure, UN Comtrade, and now we are really working on Orbis IP and Orbis cross investment in order to look at the strategies of foreign direct investment of technologically intensive CRM, technologically intensive users. So, I mean, the trends are clear as long as technologies are concerned. You can see these are 13 selected rare metals, and the list appears on your right. But the general technological dependence on these 13, you can see that over time has been increasing. Here is up to 2015, but we have now data up to 2023. You can see that not all materials have obviously being so critical for new technologies. On the top, we have indium, gallium, germanium, tantalum, lithium, molybdenum, and others. But you can see that all have increased. This technological dependencies, particularly increasing with rapid rhythm after the second half of the 2010s. Another example is to look at technological fields. Here there are aggregated, and I mean, obviously I cannot report the narrow technological fields or categories, classes, but you can see that there is varying dependence according to the broad field, the chemistry, electrical engineering, instrument, mechanical equipment, and green energy. But you can see, however, that each of these fields, particularly, for example, as we know, fuel cells, biofuels, solar energy, wind energy, nuclear energy, depends on different materials. Now, all this has been put in a conceptual framework that works quite well and is based on the literature of the economics of technological change and innovation, technological regimes, that tells us in particular that each industry, independently from the technologies, because technology cut across different industries, but it is, how to say, is bounded by the knowledge base, and so changing material correspond to the change of the underpinning scientific principles. In other words, advances in science, technological opportunities emerge from new materials or new uses of old materials, which enable new technological functions and therefore also new technological paths. And then also the appropriability of returns conditions are therefore dependent on the supply of these critical raw materials. All this fits very well in the notion of technological paradigm and technological shift that in a way describe perfectly well what is the dual transition today, digital and green transition. So one example is specifically renewable energies. Here again, I'm talking about technologies, not sectors. And you can see that, I mean, between the 70s and 2020, the share of patents in renewable energy, the upper line in blue, is more and more classified as renewable energy and material technology. So this overlapping with the scientific based change is far more prominent for renewable energies as compared to all the other technologies. And also the share of patents in renewable energy that are based and use critical materials is higher and growing with respect to all the other technologies that validate our theoretical framework. Now, this is an example of the share of patents that use critical raw materials. Here, the critical raw materials is the 5 official lists from EU, US, Australia, Japan, and Canada, sorry. So 63 overall, And we see that the big users are all the big tech. Actually, also Google, Apple are in this list. Samsung, we know also that some of this big tech, Samsung, Toyota, Taiwan Semiconductor, and so on and so forth, and each actually rely on different critical materials precisely because it develops different technological lines. So looking at the geographical distribution, I appreciated a lot the maps and the charts produced by the colleague before. You can see, broadly speaking, that the comparison between the geographical distribution of patent assignés, so those firms that own the technology, with production that are the red circle, you can see the concentration in the global north and in a very few places. The biggest are Tokyo, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, and Paris, London, and a few big technological hotspots in Europe, and some in China. Obviously, I forgot China, Beijing, and Shanghai in particular. But then if you compare that with the critical raw material production share, that obviously doesn't mean extraction because can be largely fueled by imports, it is distributed where all the deposits are not, in the sense that the deposit or prospective deposit, in fact, is much widespread, more widespread, both in global north and in the global south in particular. And you can see Africa is more or less white for everything, and Latin America and Southeast Asia similarly, but they have in principle a lot of these resources. So the EU worries here, I reconnect both with Gracelin and with Osmel. You know, there is this strategy in place. It's been a sort of a part within the more wide open autonomy strategy framework, which is a macroeconomic industrial strategy. And you see that the EU, that is very heavily dependent, even more than the US, Gracelin, on imports from DRC, South Africa, Turkey, China, and so on and so forth, has set some kind of hopes for being autonomous in terms of extraction, processing, recycling, external sources. This strategy has been, I mean, it is in the EU Critical Raw Material Act, November 2023, so it's a relatively new strategies in the open strategic autonomy, and however has in our view big limitation. First of all, material scarcity. Exactly, Europe doesn't have much of these resources. Just to show you, this is the deposit of rare earth elements, metals, for the renewable energy sectors. And in this case, we are looking at industries and not technologies. And you can see NUTS3, I mean, the number of deposits is really very small. And these maps we have for all of these elements and materials, and show more or less, I mean, rather worrying pictures, right? On the other hand, we are looking also at the mining firms together with the firms that provide services, so mechanical equipment, technologies, and other services to the mining firms. And also here, this doesn't necessarily correspond with the deposit or the prospective deposit, but we can see that capabilities somehow either have been completely wiped out in the 70s and 80s with the closure of previous mining. And so here the problem is, okay, we have material scarcity. I was saying before the start, we don't really, and if anyone is aware of a comprehensive database of geological resources for Europe in this case, because we are working with the HDI and others, as said, but we really lack a detailed map of deposit and mines operating, non-operating, and so on and so forth. The second worry is precisely what Osmel was mentioning, right? I mean, you can see, and we all see, I mean, in Bolivia, in the DRC, in Latin America, in the Lithium Triangle, there are costs, and many of these costs, beyond conflicts, beyond human rights violation, workers' violation, is also environmental damage. So this trade-off should be, in a way, accounted for. But also in Europe, I mean, this socialized of operate, I mean, it's a problem, and it's a local problem. So a sort of macroeconomic policy, industrial policy that doesn't have a territorial footprint, that doesn't have, as Osman was saying, how are we going to engage with the community, offer a detailed plan of what are the costs, what are the benefits, and what are the strategies to align this. And so the third worry is precisely this open strategic autonomy that is, I mean, uses sometimes a language that is a bit strange. I mean, you know, relying on like-minded economies and establishing relationship here. We are working also on trade data. Obviously, this shows that the European Union is really very heavily dependent on imports from outside. On the other hand, we feel that in this sense, Europe is missing for the nth time an opportunity of engaging in a different discourse with African countries, African regions, where fairer, more solid transfers of skills, capabilities, and value added should have probably been put in place long ago. While we know, I was last year in Namibia at the NUST to give a talk about this, and what you see with your own eyes, I'm sure that Osmel and Gracelin are far more informed than me. You see that basically Europe is absent. Foreign direct investment, foreign firms, foreign miners are basically Chinese. And, you know, we were sitting here just looking and thinking about what to do. So there is a whole geopolitical order, as Osmel was saying, if we do not want to turn this in another war, as we have, I'm afraid, too many at this moment. So this is our work. My team of co-authors are all ex-PhD students. I'm very lucky for this point of view. Some are available, some are in progress, and I really hope to find colleagues to collaborate on this. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Simona. There was a tour de force through the technological paradigms and how they're shifting as a result of these sort of mineral supplies and shortages. I was wondering, to begin with, I mean, you mentioned
Hello.
that the
Okay, sorry.
Gracelin. Okay. As first of all, you were saying sort of that the percentage of patents that were sort of citing these critical minerals is increasing. So you don't see sort of like the availability of these resources to be a let's say a bottleneck for green innovation. Is that correct? And on the other hand, sort of like on the cobalt front, like again, I think they're like, you know, the Dosi quote you mentioned is sort of like innovation is a function of, let's say, the technological realities. I would say that some minerals are scarce, like cobalt, for example. It's quite a risk because it's so concentrated in the DRC that you, as a European Union, for example, you can't do very much about it. And then, I mean, you showed the map for Europe. Like, do you see sort of Europe, let's say, domestically, I don't know, opening new mines, for example, I mean, it was essentially concentrated in the Nordic countries. Do you see this as, let's say, like a viable diversification strategy for the continent, or maybe also like what would you advise Europe to have as let's say so like a alliance strategy? Because I think Gracelin, you know, is advising the US. I think the US is pretty assertive in this space. China as well. It always seems to me as if, I don't know, maybe Europe is a bit naive and always late to the party. But yeah, maybe you can tell us what you think.
Well, these are big questions, Niels. I would say that as far as, I mean, the overall trend, dependence of technology, so as detected by patents, and we have a lot of validation, as I said, that we are actually grasping quite specifically this technological trajectories, is not really overall showing decrease. But this is because the range of these materials is quite wide, and we so far what we are interested in comparing technologies and tracing technologies, so we are not focusing on one specific, although we have, you know, so I should have looked at cobalt based patents, and maybe I find it slightly, although I mean what that chart shows at least up to 2015, but I think also up to 2020, this was not visible. Okay, now we know that science and technology go ahead. As I said, science in new materials drag the technology and the change of materials, and it's possibly that in the last few years we will see a substitution effect. We are keeping an eye on patents in this respect, but I mean, we will see that probably in a few years more, and you know, we need also validation for the methodology in this sense, substitution. Okay. On the other hand, Nordic countries have been probably the biggest, the largest providers of this mineral. I mean, as you said, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and other parts of Europe, you know, between Portugal and Spain, there are, but it's not enough. This is for sure. We are very, very far from being autonomous, and this is acknowledged in the strategy of the European Union. In my opinion, a lot, and this is something that Gracelin was also mentioning before, is based on solid, fair, transparent trade agreements that entails benefits and, you know, a fair repartition of benefits and costs for all parts. And there are very many ways to make this exchange fairer. That's the point. Then I could talk forever, but
I was just wondering, great, thanks so much. And I was wondering, sort of like you showed the one map sort of like on technological capabilities. Like I remember Germany being, I don't think we have like active mine equipment and technology, but it's more, I think we're supplying actually a lot of like the mines in Latin America and so on from Osmel would know more. But I was wondering, so let's assume for a second, you know, that geopolitical, I don't know, there's like the Taiwan crisis is really sort of like heating up. You know, there's like export restrictions, let's say from China. Like, do you think it's like this lack of capability is something that is really fierce, so to speak? Because like just as an example, I think battery technology, Germany, I think sort of closed down, I don't know, in the 70s or 80s, and now we're doing gigafactories again. So meaning like, if you really need to, you know, I think, and that's sort of like the big questions with these geopolitical tensions that could arise again. I mean, we all know that sort of like, yeah, Germany was probably too naive with respect to our eastern neighbors. But would you say sort of like, let's say this really heats up, like going forward, do you think that, I don't know, sort of similar as now the German chancellor is going to Serbia, for example, to really make sure sort of they sort of try to secure their supply, like they could, I don't know, open new mines, let's say in Sweden, Finland, Norway, because I mean, those were the countries on the map, but like also where, let's say, these social problems, just because of, let's say, population density, you know, can be managed.
I mean, this is a question for everybody, I think, Niels. Anyway, I mean, the capabilities is also mining capabilities connected to the industry, which is very different from technological capabilities, okay? So that has to be seen because a lot has been lost in Europe. And we are now at this stage looking at a way to measure across regions, European regions, but it's, I mean, going to Serbia, I mean, Serbia is not European Union, is a candidate country. And, you know, if you look at the geopolitics, the big reaction against Rio Tinto might have also been fueled by some other geopolitical interest. So, I mean, you know, it's not a fluid situation. It's not that Germany went to, you know, northern France saying, hey, shall we put resources in common? It's easy, but it is late. It is very late, and it's not been managed very well. Unfortunately, in this sense, Europe, for a matter of survival, probably we have been too much inward looking and not developing strategies with you know, other partners, not only like-minded, but you know, diverse partners. Let's put it this way.
Perfect. Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to start the Q&A, and then I'm going to first start off with Davide's question. I'm going to pose it primarily to Gracelin. So will controlling minerals become a defining competitive advantage for the economy of a country on a global scale? And can the need for minerals become a source of conflict and geopolitical instability in the coming years? So again, sort of like Gracelin, because you advise the US government, I think, on these issues. So I'm wondering, what would you, for example, like recommend, let's say, to the European Union? I mean, as an example, like it was probably 10 years ago when I remember a talk by Dambisa Moyo, so the Zambian economist, sort of outlining how China, since very long, has sort of secured supply strategically, such as like buying assets and then holding them. And again, with Ukraine, we saw how that might get you sort of unexpectedly. So I don't know, Gracelin, how do you see this unfolding also going forward? And do you maybe have, let's say, some recommendation on how Europe could manage this better?
Sorry, Nils, was that for me? I apologize. I just had a call come in. Could you give me that question back in like 20 seconds?
Sure, of course. So
multitasking more than I'd like this morning.
No worries. So I was wondering, kind of like, is controlling minerals going to become a competitive advantage for individual countries? And can this become sort of like a source of conflict and geopolitical instability? So essentially, like, you're advising the US on sort of how to, let's say, source strategically. Do you think it's doing that well? And can the European Union, for example, act more strategically in this space? And let's say, would you say that geopolitical tensions are going to, I don't know, increase, decrease, plateau? Sort of, where do you see this moving forward with respect to resource supply?
I think there's a couple different ways we can cut that cake. So one of it is looking at pure demand for minerals, and I'm going to pivot a little bit from energy to national security in that way. Is we have a book coming out in January, and the chapter on the defense industry looks at mineral needs for the defense industry. We have so much simmering conflict or active conflict going on right now, right? You have the Middle East, you have Ukraine, you have, you know, kind of things heating up, and everybody, you know, China's definitely stockpiling resources. They put in severe restrictions on antimony, which is primarily a defense commodity, in August, which is used in missiles, bullets, etc. And so what we're also going to see a little bit of is demand for commodities may move in an interesting way based on current geopolitical conflict and tension as one from a demand point of view, right? The second thing I think is with simmering tensions from a supply point of view is, yeah, I mean, look, it's really interesting as we see Frank Fannon was our Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources. He's wrote a chapter for our book as well. I was just finishing it before this call this morning, doing a review of it. And he makes a really important point that he feels like Europe is more friendly with China, like, the German chancellor was with, Chinese leadership to say, we look forward to boosting business ties type thing. Is the US and EU could potentially take a divergent path on China, right? And that would have impact on minerals as well and alliances. And again, we have an election in a terrifyingly less than 30 days. And that could have a big outcome, right? Trump is far more hawkish to China than Harris is. Harris is self-identified as a non-protectionist Democrat, right? If it's going to make the bottom line more expensive for households for things like EVs, etc., she is less interested. Trump's tariff plan would increase household costs, particularly because a lot of them are going to be on mineral intensive goods by $2,600 to $4,000. That's a lot. And she's kind of in the debate, you saw her clearly push back against what she calls a sales tax. So now tying back is they would be very divergent potentially on that front. And there may be a little potentially if Trump comes in and he sees that Europe is tight, willing to boost ties with China, you could see Trump, we've seen him being a little geopolitically erratic, very anti, things like that, push back against, even the EU in that context. So there's a lot of uncertainties right now on the election. US to China, or US and EU have semi-taken divergent routes on China more recently, in my opinion. And then obviously the existing conflicts and the way they play out and grow, shrink, ceasefire will have an impact as well. So there's a lot of unknowns at play, but there's a lot of knowns that are just making our heads spin.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So the next question from Festa, I'm going to play to Osmel. Essentially, is there some sort of basic steps towards this more socially fair, environmentally more realistic approach to mining policy? Because I think that's really something where sort of the Latin American region has a lot more experience and ideally so like best practice to share, like what like on the map, maybe what are some instances where things, let's say have gone better and maybe is something that can be replicated, because I mean, my experience working in Africa, I think things are very challenging. I think in Latin America they're a bit more advanced.
Well, I think there are many things. I think that we need firstly to begin to document, as you say, the positive experience, which I think we have been really lousy, and just give an example. I don't want to put the country or the mine just because of the companies, but we have two mines 100 miles apart. One was working, another not, and it was the different approach. One was willing to engage in with the community in the things that the community wants. So the community want, like, for example, money or things like that. They were actually fishermen. They were not even interested in mining, and the mining company just invested in helping them improve their fishing business, and they were happy. While the other company was just giving money away, and citizens just shut down the mine. So that those, I mean, I'm not saying that this is a roadmap for everyone, but the problem is that we haven't not documented those experiences, and I think that that's kind of one first thing that we need to do. And the second one is also we need to. I mean, what I see the challenge right now is the different levels of government, right? You have international, national, and then local, and I begin to see more and more conflicts, and I'm. I don't know how many of you know, but Albemarle, a mining company in Chile, decide to give direct transfers to the community. So not to the federal government, not to the local government, to the community, in one of the lithium mines, This is completely new. This was done in coordination with the Chilean government, because this also has a lot of challenges of how you are, if you wish, going above the governments and the local government. but the experience is there, is working. So I think that that might open a road of how to share, if you wish, the pie, no? But but it opens also a huge discussion because you have all these federal, local, and things like that. So I think that also we need to begin if to work better on understanding, the responsibilities of different levels of governments, which changes from country to country, and in that context, how mines or mining operators can then engage with the community, no? And again, we have so the bottom line is that we need to begin to document what is working and not, because I think one of the problems that we have is that we have not been very good at, no?
Excellent. So yeah, you got your work cut out going forward. Simona, I'm wondering, sort of Carla is asking sort of why recycling of minerals is not more, let's say, of an answer. I think the short, from what I know, I think it's the estimates go to, it's about, it can be like 10% or so, right? Of, let's say, total demand. But yeah, maybe is that an option that also should be considered more?
It is definitely, it is an option. It is as we know. I mean, I know very little about it. I'm not studying it precisely. That we look also to that into the patterns with the algorithm to detect. But technologies for recycling, we find really very little. But probably that will change over time, as I said. Okay, but. I think that I read the question, she was right in saying that if there is no private investment, there should be public investment, because this is precisely when, there is a failure of the market. I think that would be, or a mix. I was also very interested in what Osmel was saying about this, let's say, a different behavior of company and sharing directly with the lower level of governance, so particularly addressing places, communities, and more generally, from my experience of precisely working at the local, regional, local level, the problem is local governance. So, I mean, we have a long experience with, the European Commission, particularly with regional policies, right? That works well until there are policy structure and institutions that in a way function, but this is the risk, right? And so obviously intervention has to be there, and so is concerted, not only private sector saying, okay, we share directly with the community, but probably a regulatory framework that checks that then this is the most efficient and fairer allocation of the resources. I don't know if Osmel agrees on this.
Maybe just Osmel, you can Osmel, if you can also, I mean, local content is something which I think has been sort of applied quite a bit in, let's say, resource extraction as part of sort of like benefit sharing, which is now like actually like a new part of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Is that something sort of you'd say should be done more in order to sort of like ensure the social license to operate, or how have the experiences been in that area?
No, let me go think. I do agree that the challenge right now is local governance, no? But the problem in Latin America is that there is many different forms of government today, no? So we have really federal states like Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, right? And there are other governments that are really unitarian, but that they have some kind of decentralization, but they are not truly federal, right? Like Colombia, Peru, Chile, no? That then makes things harder, no? On how you're going to operate, no? And how the rules are set for sharing, for example, and even the rules of who decides the concession, no? And things like that, because even there are differences between countries, no? So I think that's the big challenge right now, no, local governance, no, going forward, no. That's why we need to understand a little bit better, you know, different engagement mechanisms to see which are the ones that are working, no. But unfortunately, maybe this is or most likely this will be an area where one size will not fit all, because it will depend on the context, no. It will not be the same solution for Argentina than the same solution for Peru, for example, no.
Exactly.
So, because of that, no.
Exactly that.
Because of their history and things like that, no. And then local content, I think that, you know, some years ago I was invited by CAPSAR to a seminar on managing expectations in Africa, no. So I went to Dar es Salaam, no. And for me, what was striking is that, you know, local content does not mean the same in all the world, no. For many people that were in that conference from Africa, local content means employment. I want a job, no? In our Latin American tradition of import substitutions, local content means I want to do something about it, no? So I think that that's another problem, that, you know, local content means different things in different parts of the world. So we have to be careful of what do we mean by local content, no?
Perfect. Thanks so much. I definitely learned a lot, not just about the perceived lack of oil in the 1950s. I'm just, yeah, thank you all so much. I'm going to give each of you sort of like just the chance for maybe like some closing remarks. So ladies first, Gracelin, Simona, and then back to Osmel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nils. This was really interesting. I mean, I think there's a couple things that jump out to me. Is one, like, first of all, minerals cross-cut like uses. Energy is going to be the biggest driver of it, no doubt. Two, every region of the world plays an important role, right? Whether you're Australia, Latin America, Africa. I mean, the EU is certainly leading the way with things like the battery passport. They have a very important role to play: circular economy, traceability, et cetera. They do better than the US by miles. The US is playing actively. China, non-China, India. India is like probably going to be the biggest driver of demand as the future of the economy, right? They have the biggest population, rising incomes, aggressive industrial policy. They actually have decent rare resource reserves as well. 4 times the size of rare earth reserves of the United States. So, I mean, it's really like every part of the world is coming together and everybody's moving in the same direction. And the last thing I would say is, you know, sorry, getting over this cold. When I work with policymakers, particularly in Africa, like, you can't go in and be like, you know, China is bad. They're just not interested in that narrative at all. So I was sitting at the London Indaba and I realized that somebody was going to put a bullet through my forehead if that's what I said. You could see like the grimacing, you know. So I realized the way you have to really repackage it, semantics matter. I go, well, global dispersion is really healthy. Right. And it's true. Like in the case of like a lot of these countries, when I was at the Congolese mining minister in Indonesia, one source of investment and one source of offtake is not healthy. Right. We've seen the Chinese economy is wavering, property sector, high levels of government debt, like not hitting growth rates. So dispersion is healthy. So we're working to a diversified global minerals economy. And I think, you know, it's very much a public-private effort. So it's an exciting time to be working in this space. Thanks. Don't laugh at me, Nils.
No. I wish both you and Simona to get better soon. Simona.
Okay, I think first of all, I am interested in understanding technological transition, cost and benefits. So this is really important, interdisciplinary. So that's why I'm in collaboration with different points of view. It's very important to understand the implication, to understand what this new technological shift, the balance of precisely the cost and benefits associated. Factoring the geographical unevenness of the impact of this dual transition, both in places in the global north and in places in the global south. So much more fine-grained territorial perspective. That is what is my specialism and my, in a way, belief as an approach overall. And then it is important aligning this space-blind macro-industrial policies that have global implication, but they do not have any kind of, they have global implication, but at the local level, and they do not have any local regional development policy, both sides, inclusiveness and fair international trade, international investment, and sharing of skills and competences. So this is the basic, tenets of my research, and thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Osmo, final words?
I think that, Simona said, well, this is a global issue, but the solutions are local, no? So this is going to be really challenging, no? And therefore, I think we need to begin to work more with the locals, no? And it's going to be harder, but we need to, and that's kind of the way going forward. And I think that, I want to highlight that this is not only an economics issue, it's a multidisciplinary issue, no? So I show you the work with psychologists, no? But I teach at Georgetown, no? And I told you the history about these two minds. So one of the classes that my students really love is I bring the person that was in charge of the mind that did work, no? And did solve the issues of the community, no? And she's not an economist, but she tells all the process of how you engage communities and things like that, no? And then it opens the mind of the students, no? Things that if you only focus on your issues, you are doomed, no? So this is really an interdisciplinary issue where we have technological issues, but also we have sociological issues, and then it will require a lot of collaboration, no? So it will require a lot of fine-tuning to local issues, but also a lot of working together of many disciplines, no? So it's a complex challenge, no?
Excellent. Thank you so much. I believe now I have the feeling we don't have to fly to the moon. I think the answer is local. Thanks to all the work that you guys are doing in this space. Yeah, thanks so much. We're very blessed to have you. I think really interesting panel, and yeah, be in touch, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you. I really enjoyed.
Excellent.